I shined my flashlight through the shattered windshield. There was no one inside. But the seatbelt was slowly swinging on its own, as if someone had unbuckled it seconds earlier. And the engine was still running. That haul had started like any other. I'd been a truck driver for over 12 years by then. I'd seen everything, from drunk idiots weaving through traffic at 80 miles an hour to wild animals exploding out of the darkness straight under my wheels. But that night on Interstate 10, west of Las Cruces, permanently changed the way I look at empty roads. It was 2:14 a.m. I remember those numbers exactly, glowing on the radio display. That hour when caffeine has already stopped working, but dawn is still far away. The highway was dead. No oncoming headlights. No taillights ahead. Just an endless gray ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the ink-black desert. My rig hummed steadily, devouring miles. Usually that monotone sound calms me, but that night there was tension hanging in the air. You know that feeling when the atmosphere turns heavy before a storm? Like that. Except the sky was perfectly clear. I noticed it from the corner of my eye. At first, just a strange break in the darkness off the shoulder. I eased off the throttle and switched on my high beams. About 50 yards off the pavement, among dry brush and sand, sat a sedan. Dark blue or black, I couldn't tell in the night. It had slammed into an old dead tree. The hood was crumpled like an accordion, and a thin thread of smoke rose from beneath it, barely visible in my headlights. My first thought was to hit the gas and keep going. Stopping in places like that at night is never a smart idea. But then I thought about someone trapped inside, bleeding out while I cowardly drove past. I sighed hard, hit my hazards, and began slowing down. With a hiss of air brakes, the semi rolled to a stop on the shoulder. I killed the engine but left the headlights on, lighting up the crash site. From under the seat I grabbed my heavy mag-light flashlight. It throws a hell of a beam, and in a worst-case scenario, it can crack a skull. I jumped down from the cab and immediately felt how sharply the temperature had dropped. The desert doesn't forgive carelessness at night. Cold wind slipped beneath my jacket. Gravel crunched too loudly under my boots. I walked toward the car, and with every step I felt more uneasy. There was absolute silence around me. Ringing silence. Even the coyotes weren't howling. Only the soft, uneven putter of the wrecked sedan's engine. As I got closer, I caught the sharp smell of antifreeze and burnt rubber. The left headlight was smashed. The right one glowed dimly into the tree trunk. I raised my flashlight and aimed it at the driver's seat. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks with a huge hole punched through the center. I held my breath, expecting to see a bloody body slumped over the wheel. Instead, the beam found only an empty seat. I stepped closer, glass crunching under my boots. I looked into the cabin. Nobody. Not in the driver's seat. Not the passenger seat. Not in the back. But something was wrong. My brain didn't assemble the picture right away. The engine was running. It knocked softly and unevenly, like it was choking. The key was still in the ignition. Then I saw the belt. The driver's seat belt was slowly swinging. Back and forth. Back and forth. Like a pendulum. For it to move like that, someone had to have unbuckled it only seconds before I arrived. My heart skipped. I spun around, sweeping the flashlight through the brush. Nothing. Only pale thorn shadows. "Hey!" I shouted. My voice sounded weak and muffled in that emptiness. "Anyone alive?" "I'm a truck driver, I can help." Only the wind answered. I turned back to the car. Then my eyes caught a detail that sent cold sweat down my spine. The windshield. The hole in it. The broken glass wasn't inside the cabin. It had spilled outward onto the hood. The windshield hadn't been smashed from outside to pull the driver free. It had been kicked out from the inside. I aimed the light at the steering wheel. On the gray plastic was a dark, wet handprint. Blood. Still fresh. It glistened in the beam. So the driver had been injured. He smashed the windshield from inside, crawled out, and... where had he gone? Why didn't he run toward my semi, glowing like a Christmas tree on the shoulder? I took a step back. Every instinct I had was screaming to get out. I started scanning the ground around the car for tracks. And I found them. But they didn't lead toward the road. They led away from the sedan, deeper into the desert. And they were strange tracks. 2 deep furrows in the sand, as if something heavy had been dragged. I swallowed thick saliva. Had someone pulled the driver away? Or had he crawled? Suddenly, a sound burst from the open car window. A low burst of distorted static. The radio. It had been off seconds ago. I would swear to it. Now white noise hissed through the speakers, and beneath it came a strange rhythmic tapping. Knock. 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 I backed away, never taking the flashlight off the car. Then I noticed something else. Something that completely changed my understanding of the situation. The rear passenger side door was cracked open a couple inches. I would have sworn every door had been closed when I walked up. Someone had been there. Someone hiding in the blind spot while I stared through the windshield. And that someone had just slipped out. I whipped the flashlight toward my truck. It stood 50 yards away. Huge. Safe. But between me and the cab now lay a strip of total darkness. I started walking. Fast. Almost running. I never took my eyes off my rig. Then, halfway there, I saw it. In the glow of my hazard lights, near the rear wheels of the trailer, stood a silhouette. It wasn't the injured driver. The figure stood perfectly straight. Unnaturally straight. Tall. Wearing something dark and shapeless. It didn't move. It simply watched me. I froze where I stood, feeling cold lock around my insides. I was trapped. Behind me, the wrecked car and whoever had hidden inside it. Ahead of me, this figure blocking my way to the cab. I raised the flashlight and pointed the beam straight at it. But the light didn't reach. The beam seemed to dissolve into darkness before touching him. Then the silhouette took a step. Not toward me. Under the trailer. At that exact second, I heard metal clink. Soft but clear. The sound of someone messing with the air brake lines. They were trying to disable my brakes. This wasn't a random crash. It was an ambush. The wrecked car, the running engine, the blood. All bait for fools like me who stopped to play hero on empty highways. Adrenaline slammed through me. Fear turned into raw animal rage and the need to survive. I sprinted forward as fast as I could in heavy boots. Hey! Get the hell away from my truck! I screamed so hard I tore my voice. I ran swinging the flashlight like a weapon. The figure under the trailer jerked. I heard pounding footsteps, someone running into the darkness on the far side of the road. I reached the cab, yanked the handle, climbed in, and slammed the door behind me. I hit the central lock. My breath whistled out of my lungs. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the key into the ignition. I had shut the truck off when I got out. The engine roared back to life. I switched on every light I had, flooding the roadside. No one. I checked the side mirror. Near the wrecked sedan stood 3 figures. 3 dark shapes on the edge of light and shadow. They simply watched my truck. I buried the accelerator. The rig lurched, slowly building speed. I prayed they hadn't cut the lines in time. Air pressure held. The brakes released. I shot back onto the interstate, ignoring the lane markings. I drove non-stop all the way to El Paso. Only at a brightly lit truck stop surrounded by other drivers did I let myself get out and inspect the rig. There were deep gouges on the brake air hoses. Someone had tried to cut through them. They had missed finishing the job by seconds. If I'd stayed at that wreck 1 minute longer, I'd have died there. Since then, I never stop for wrecked cars at night. I call 911, give the coordinates, and keep driving. Because sometimes an empty car on the shoulder isn't the scene of a tragedy. It's a mousetrap. Listen, if you're sitting in a dark room right now, riding a night bus, or lying in bed with your phone, take a deep breath. I know what it feels like when the dark starts pressing on your nerves. If you're still here, leave a comment telling me what city you're in and what time it is there. I've always wondered where and when people listen to these stories. And if you like this kind of format, just hit like. It lets me know I'm not telling these for nothing. Now let's move on to the second story. It happened to me a couple years after that night in New Mexico, and honestly, it scares me even more. Because this time, the danger wasn't outside. It was right under my nose. I woke up and saw a different section of the parking lot outside my window. My rig was parked 3 rows away from where I had left it. And the worst part, my ignition keys had been under my pillow the entire time. It was a major truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas. One of those places that never really sleeps, where the air always smells like fried bacon, diesel fuel, and burnt cheap coffee. The time was 3:37 a.m. I know that because the first thing I did after opening my eyes was look at the digital clock above the dashboard. I had parked there around 10 that night. I was beyond exhausted, 14 brutal hours on the road behind me, most of them through pounding rain. I had chosen my spot carefully. I always do. I parked on the outer edge beside a huge bright yellow Peterbilt with a chrome bulldog painted on the side. I remember thinking it would make a perfect landmark. I pulled the blackout curtains across the cab windows, locked both doors with the inside latches, slid my key ring under the pillow in the sleeper berth like I always did, and passed out the second my head hit the mattress. Waking up felt wrong. No loud noise had disturbed me. No headlights had flashed through the curtains. What woke me was the sense that something was off. You know that feeling when you wake up in your own bedroom, but your instincts are screaming that someone moved the furniture? The cab was too quiet. Normally, in a truck stop like that, you hear the low endless rumble of neighboring refrigerated trailers. That yellow Peterbilt had been hauling reefer freight, and its unit rattled like an old tractor. Now there was nothing. Dead silence. I sat up on the mattress and rubbed my face. The air in the cab felt stale and cold. I reached for the curtain separating the sleeper from the driver's seat and pulled it aside. Light from the parking lot lamp seeped through the crack in the windshield curtains. But the angle was wrong. Frowning, I climbed into the driver's seat and peeled the curtain back another inch. The yellow Peterbilt was gone. Instead, to my left sat a rusted dumpster. To my right, empty pavement. I looked straight ahead. The truck stop building, which should have been directly in front of me, was far off to the left, maybe 200 yards away. My truck was parked in the farthest, darkest corner of the lot. Right where the asphalt gave way to gravel and dirt. Everything inside me went cold. Sleep vanished instantly. I spun around, grabbed the pillow, and lifted it. The keys were still there. My spare keys were locked in a safe under the bunk, and only I knew the code. I stared at the dashboard. The odometer. I always memorize the last few digits of the mileage before I go to sleep. They hadn't changed by even a tenth of a mile. The engine had never been started. Someone had moved my tractor trailer. The whole massive machine, trailer and all, had been shifted 3 rows into the dark while I slept inside it. How? With a tow truck? I would have woken up from the jolt and the sound of a hookup. Besides, my rig had air brakes. Without the engine running and the system pressurized, the wheels lock solid. To release them, you have to manually cage the brake chambers under the trailer by tightening the release bolts. It's dirty, noisy, time-consuming work. My mind raced for a logical explanation while my hand instinctively reached between the seats for the heavy wooden tire thumper I always kept there. Then I felt it. The slightest movement. The truck gave a tiny sway, almost too subtle to notice, like someone had just shifted their weight onto the step outside. I froze and stopped breathing. The cab was pitch black. I listened so hard my ears rang. Then I heard it. Right outside my door. A soft, wet scraping sound. Like someone dragging a palm slowly across the metal. Then a metallic click. Someone testing the handle. The doors were locked from the inside. I could see the red lock tabs. The scraping moved forward, gliding along the cab toward the hood. Slowly, trying not to make a sound, I dropped to my knees, crawled across to the passenger seat, and pressed one eye to the narrow gap between the curtains. In the dim glow of a distant lamp, I saw a silhouette. A person in a bulky hooded jacket stood at the front bumper of my truck. He wasn't stealing anything. He was just standing there, staring at the windshield. Staring directly at the spot where I was hiding behind the curtain. A chill ran up my spine. It felt like he could see me through the fabric. Then, behind me near the trailer, came a dull metallic bang. Then another. Steel groaned. There was more than one of them. One distracting me up front while the others worked at the trailer doors. But I was hauling pallets of cheap toilet paper and paper towels. Nobody hijacks a truck in the dark for that kind of freight. If they didn't want the cargo, then they wanted the tractor. Or me. I remembered stories about crews who pump sleeping gas through cab ventilation systems, knock drivers out, then do whatever they want with the truck and the driver. I sniffed the air quickly. Nothing unusual. But my head did feel strangely heavy. I made a decision. Sitting in a dark metal box waiting for them to come through the doors was how people died. I grabbed my keys and jammed them into the ignition. My other hand landed on the air horn. I turned the key. The big diesel roared to life, tearing through the night. At the same instant, I slammed the horn and switched on every light I had, headlights, fog lights, roof lamps, everything. The world in front of the truck exploded in white light. The hooded man recoiled from the bumper, throwing his arms over his face. The air horn screamed hard enough to shake the glass. I saw the figure turn and run into the darkness. I checked the right side mirror. Two more shadows broke away from the rear doors of my trailer and sprinted toward a black SUV parked 20 yards away with no lights on. They jumped inside. The vehicle launched in a spray of gravel and disappeared behind the truck stop building. I sat there gripping the wheel, breathing hard. The engine idled beneath me. I released the horn. All over the lot, headlights began flicking on. Other truckers were climbing out of their cabs, cursing the noise. Only when several drivers had gathered nearby did I dare open the door and step down. My legs were shaking. We inspected the rig. What we found made my stomach turn. The brake chamber bolts on the trailer had been tightened. They had manually released the brakes. Fresh gouges scarred the metal beneath the front bumper of my tractor. They hadn't started my truck. They had used their heavy SUV, with a reinforced bumper, to slowly shove my rig inch by inch from the well-lit parking space into the blind corner of the lot. It must have taken them at least half an hour. And I had slept through all of it. But the worst thing was what we found at the trailer doors. The locks were untouched. They hadn't even tried to open them. Instead, the caps on my fuel tanks had been unscrewed. And lying on the gravel nearby was a length of thick rubber hose and an empty plastic jug. They weren't after the cargo. They weren't after the truck. Were they siphoning fuel? No. You don't need to push a rig into darkness to steal diesel. One of the older drivers shined his flashlight into the tank and went pale. "Kid," he said quietly. "They weren't stealing fuel. They dumped something in there." White granules floated on the surface. Sugar. Or some other chemical garbage. If I had started the engine and driven off, 20 or 30 miles later that motor would have died hard. I would have been stranded on a deserted stretch of highway. No signal. No people. And I know exactly who would have rolled up beside me in that black SUV to help. They hadn't moved me into the dark to rob me there. They were setting the trap for later. The fact that I woke up and scared them off probably saved my life. I called the police. They came, took statements, shrugged, and said crews like that worked stretches of Interstate 40 all the time. My truck had to be towed out and the entire fuel system flushed. It cost me a fortune. But money is trash compared to the sticky, crawling dread I feel now every time I sleep in a cab. Now I wake up at every little sound. And the first thing I do is look out the window to make sure the world outside hasn't changed while my eyes were closed. An hour later, I walked into a roadside diner and froze. That same old man was staring at me from a faded photograph on the memorial wall. Beneath the picture, in neat lettering, were the words, "Killed while waiting for his son to return. 1998. But let me start at the beginning. This third story is different from the first two. In those, I ran into human cruelty and human cunning. What happened in Wyoming still doesn't fit anywhere inside my head. I have no rational explanation for it. All I have are the facts. And the cold sweat that breaks across my skin every time I remember that morning. It was early February. I was running Interstate 80 near Cheyenne, Wyoming. If you've ever driven that stretch in winter, then you know what kind of hell it is. Open plains. Knife-edged wind trying to shove your trailer off the road. Temperatures so low diesel starts to thicken in the tanks. That night a full blizzard had rolled in. Visibility dropped to nearly zero. I was crawling along at no more than 20 miles an hour, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The wipers could barely keep up with the snow caking the windshield. The heater was blasting, but the cab still felt cold. The clock read 5:08 a.m. The deadest hour of the night. I was praying for one thing only. Make it to the next truck stop and wait this nightmare out. The road had turned into polished black ice. One wrong twitch of the wheel, and 30 tons of steel would slide straight into the ditch. That was when I saw the figure. Through the curtain of blowing snow, caught in my headlights. A man stood on the narrow shoulder, barely 3 feet from the passing lane, which, to be fair, had almost no traffic at all. Instinctively, I hit the brakes. Then I immediately let off so I wouldn't jackknife. The rig groaned to a slow stop 30 yards ahead of him, ABS chattering beneath me. I stared into the side mirror. Through the blizzard, the red marker lights of my trailer lit the man behind me. It was an old man. He wore a faded red and black flannel shirt, worn jeans, and a baseball cap. No winter coat. No gloves. Nothing. It was 20 below with brutal wind chill. A man dressed like that should have frozen to death in 10 minutes. But he stood upright, motionless. No shivering. No hunching against the wind. Just staring down the highway in the direction I was traveling. 1,000 thoughts hit me at once. Escaped nursing home? Car wreck victim in shock? A ghost? I'm not a superstitious man, but out there on that empty snow-covered interstate, believing in something supernatural felt easier than believing a living man could stand there like that. The moral choice tore at me. If I got out, I could slip. A passing vehicle could hit me. If I stayed in the cab, he would die. I pulled on my heavy coat, grabbed my flashlight, fought the wind that nearly ripped the door from my hand, and jumped down from the truck. Snow stung my face like gravel. "Hey!" I shouted as I approached him, the wind tearing the words away. "Sir! What the hell are you doing out here?" I got within a few feet. He slowly turned his head toward me. His face was pale, deeply lined with age. But his eyes were perfectly clear and calm. There was no frost on his eyebrows. No ice on his mustache. That shook me more than anything else. Snowflakes landed on his flannel shirt and did not melt. "You'll freeze to death," I yelled over the storm. "Come on, get in the cab. I'll take you into Cheyenne, it's only a couple miles." He looked at me. And when he spoke, his voice sounded as though there were no wind at all. Soft. Quiet. Yet every word reached me crystal clear, as if spoken directly inside my head. "I can't leave, son. I'm waiting for my boy." "What boy?" "The road's empty. You'll die standing here." Slowly, he raised one hand and pointed with a knotted finger down the highway. "He's coming. He's always in a hurry. I need to warn him." He kept pointing. "There's ice. Black ice under the bridge." There was such calm certainty in his voice that it unsettled me. I stepped closer, intending to grab him by the arm and drag him into the warmth by force if I had to. "Listen to me, old man." I reached out and seized his shoulder. My gloved hand closed on empty air. I stumbled sideways and nearly fell into the snowbank. I spun around. No one. The shoulder was empty. Only the blizzard screaming across the asphalt. I shined my flashlight at the ground. Fresh snow covered everything. There were only my boot prints. No tracks from the old man. None. As if he had never touched the ground at all. Panic hit me like a punch to the chest. I ran back to the truck faster than I've ever run in my life, climbed inside, slammed the door, and locked it. My heart hammered in my throat. Hallucination. That's all it was. Fatigue. Snow hypnosis. My brain playing tricks on me. That's what I kept telling myself as I pulled back onto the interstate. I drove on. My hands were shaking. Then suddenly, the CB radio, silent until then, burst into static. A young man's voice broke through, full of panic. "Attention all eastbound drivers on the 80, bridge over the creek, pileup, massive wreck, solid ice, semi spun out, both lanes blocked, don't brake hard or you'll kill yourselves." The bridge over the creek. Exactly 2 miles ahead. The place the old man had pointed to. I slowed to walking speed. Turned on my flashers. 10 minutes later, police lights emerged from the whiteout. The scene was horrific. A tractor-trailer lay on its side across the interstate, blocking both lanes. 3 cars and a pickup had slammed into it. Metal was crushed like paper. It had happened maybe 15 minutes earlier. If I hadn't stopped to talk to that old man, if I hadn't lost those 5 or 7 minutes, I would have been moving at my normal speed. I would have hit that black ice under the bridge at the exact moment the semi ahead of me jackknifed. 30 tons of my truck would have plowed into that wreckage. I would have died. And I would have killed the people in those cars. I was shaking uncontrollably while I waited for police to route traffic around the crash. An hour later, I finally reached a truck stop on the outskirts of Cheyenne. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there in silence with my forehead pressed against the cold steering wheel. Then I got out and wandered into the 24-hour diner. I needed the strongest coffee they had. Inside, it was warm and smelled like fresh pastry. I took a mug, sat in a corner booth, and stared at the wall. There hung a large corkboard. Memory wall. Truckers and locals pinned photos there of people who had died on that stretch of highway. Pictures. Newspaper clippings. Old badges. Notes. My eyes moved across the faces until they stopped on one yellowed Polaroid. I froze. Coffee spilled over my hand, but I didn't even feel the burn. The old man was staring at me from the photo. Same red and black flannel shirt. Same baseball cap. Same calm, clear eyes. I stood up on numb legs and walked to the board. Pinned beneath the photograph was a clipping from an old newspaper. Local resident Arthur Pendleton, 68, was found frozen to death on the shoulder of Interstate 80 during a snowstorm. According to family members, Mr. Pendleton suffered from dementia. That night, he left home telling his caregiver he had to meet his son, who was driving in from Denver. Mr. Pendleton's son had died on that same stretch of highway 10 years earlier in a crash caused by black ice on the bridge. 1998. I stood there in front of that wall as tears rolled down my face. He wasn't an evil spirit. He wasn't a demon. He was just a father, trapped between worlds, still trying to warn his boy about the danger ahead. And that night, in the blinding snow, mistaking me for his son, he saved my life. I bought a second cup of coffee, walked back to the memorial wall, and silently placed it on the shelf beneath his picture. Since then, I'm no longer afraid of empty winter highways. Because now I know that sometimes the dark doesn't hide only monsters. Sometimes it holds those who are watching over us. Those are my 3 stories. They cured me forever of seeing the night road as something ordinary. Every time I get behind the wheel now, I remember that beyond the reach of my headlights lies an entire world living by rules we do not understand. Thank you for listening all the way through. If these stories made you glance over your shoulder even once, or check the locks on your doors, let me know in the comments. Tell me what city you're in and what time your clock says right now. It matters to me to know I'm not telling these stories into the void. Hit like if you appreciate honest stories without embellishment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next runs into the dark. Take care of yourselves. Check your back seats. And be careful out there on the roads. Good night.